Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound Radio Show, your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. I'm your host, Robert Winfrey, and tonight we will be reviewing UFC on Fox 30, which was maybe the best UFC on Fox card, especially for the main card, all things considered, that sadly has drawn the worst overnight rating in the history of the UFC on Fox series. This is why we can't have nice things, guys. They give us a card full of mostly relevant fights, full of action, violence. I'm happy with all of these things. And nobody watches. This is why we get the circus. And I hate the circus. But I'll play old man on the porch later when we go through some of that. But we'll be reviewing that card. I mean, of the last, 4 events, certainly of the last, 4 non-pay-per-view events, this was the best walking away. If we count UFC 226, I don't know that this would still be the best, but it's up there, and I'd have to go through the minutia of 226, because the only thing I remember from that event was Cormier's win. The rest of it was kind of lackluster. Okay, no, this is better than 226 because there was nothing on this card as bad as Lewis and Ngannou. Although there were 2 kind of bad fights, but we'll get into the specifics of that later. We will also preview UFC 227, which comes your way this coming Saturday. And we'll talk about why things don't exist in a vacuum. There's not much to dislike in the top 2 fights. It's 2 rematches. It's Dillashaw versus Garbrandt in a rematch for the bantamweight belt, and they had about as good a 7-minute fight as you can have their first time around. And a rematch between Demetrius Johnson and Henry Cejudo for the flyweight belt, because you have to keep the flyweight division moving. And in fairness to Henry Cejudo, he's looked really good over his last couple of fights. So, those are fine, but boy, does it drop off after that. I'm really struggling to find anything of real interest on the rest of that card. I'm really struggling. I'm looking at it right now. So we'll go over that, and we'll have fun with that. Then, of course, all the major news of the week. The UFC finished filling out UFC 228. It got a main event, so we'll talk about that and all the major news stuff. So you guys know the format by now. Let me bring on the panel then. I've got the full panel here again, so that's always nice. First up, my regular partner in crime, back from his weekend at San Diego Comic-Con. Jeff Harris is here again. Jeff, how are you?
Better than Custer and better than James Gunn.
That poor guy. I feel so bad for that. But not the place for social commentary on that particular issue. And back with us again from the East Coast, avoiding the worst of the storms, we have Pat Mullen back with us. Pat, how the heck are you?
Last week we celebrated Shark Week. This week's the Sharks will be tuned in to Pat Mullen Week.
All right. Let's jump into UFC on Fox 30 from last night. I was so grateful for this card, just before we get into the specifics, because, for the record, let's go through my last, 4 events. 4 or 5. You had the finale of The Ultimate Fighter's most recent season, which sucked. It was just terrible. You had UFC 226, which, not the worst in the world. Again, you had a relevant main event. You had Felder and Perry's insanity. Not bad, but a little bit kind of ho-hum if you watched the entire card like I did. Then you had UFC Fight Night 133, the Dos Santos versus Ivanov card, which was not good. Just really not good. Then you had Fight Night 134, which was Shogun versus Smith, which was not good. This was the 5th longest event in terms of in-cage fight time. You had 9 decisions in a row of the 10 decisions on this card. Now, I've said in the past that decisions don't mean a fight is good, bad, or otherwise. It just means it went the distance.
But it gets tedious. It gets tedious when you have that many.
And most of these weren't all that good. And then, so again, like the last 4 or 5 events have been, even Fight Night 132, which was, Cowboy and Edwards, just not a good event. I mean, there were some good intermittent things, but just not good. So the fact that last night's event was as good as it was from basically start to finish was a wonderful blessing to those of us who sit through a lot of this stuff week in and week out. In the main event, Dustin Poirier defeats Eddie Alvarez via TKO in the second round. This fight played a lot like their first fight. It played a lot like we thought it would last week. A bit more tactical from Poirier from start to finish, though. He had a much faster start in their first fight, but just a lot of really smart fighting from Poirier, a lot of sniping with leg kicks or long lefts. I was surprised at how effective his jab was, considering they were opposite stances. But he got his jab going. Then in the second round, Eddie Alvarez came back a little bit. Hit a really nice takedown. Well, sort of. He got close and Poirier jumped for a guillotine. Eddie grabbed the fence to stay upright. And God bless the ref for seeing it, because it was hard to see. Got some top position. Eddie was winning the second round, generally speaking. Then, after he gets a takedown, he's got the legs mounted. He's really close to actual full mount. His hips are very close to Poirier's hips. Poirier's sitting against the fence, and Alvarez proceeds to do essentially the following 3 things spaced out over the course of this position. He grabs the fence at some point, gets warned about it. He actually grabs the inside of Poirier's ear. The ref warns him about this a couple of times, that you're not allowed to grab the outside of the ear, much less the inside. He was kind of gouging the inside of Poirier's ear, and then throws at least 2, that I could see from the replay, 12-6 elbows. Now, they land on the shoulder of Poirier, not the head, but you still can't throw 12-6 elbows, and I want to separate the discussion.
It doesn't matter where they land.
No, they're just an illegal technique, and
that's not all Alvarez did.
No, again, like, all 3 of those things, and the ref, after seeing the 12-6 elbows, stops, halts the position, stands them back up, proceeds to tell Alvarez in relative detail, you grabbed the fence, you gouged his ear, and then you threw those elbows. I'm taking the position away from you. Which is
how
fair.
often do we see referees issue multiple warnings, and not do a damn thing?
Way too many. And honestly,
including John McCarthy, and it drives me batty.
Yeah, and honestly, he didn't do enough just by taking the position away.
If you're gonna warn a guy that many times, they're obviously not listening, and it's time to penalize.
In addition to the position, points should have been taken away, and disqualification should have been threatened.
I believe if more fighters were getting penalized for breaking the rules, we'd see less rule breaking overall, and that's why fighters like Alvarez try to do dirty garbage like that, because most fighters get away with it.
Agreed. Yeah. And since they also all work for the same sanctioning body, you should have a similar system. Like, unfortunately, they're a corrupt body, but FIFA, where you get fined monetarily when you get carded. If you get points taken away for deliberate fouls like that, you should get fined too.
I wouldn't hate that, in all honesty.
That, more than anything, would really have guys stray away from fouling if they found out it was going to cost them money.
Yeah, but on the
Mark
reset...
Goddard gets crap, but I think he's probably one of the more competent refs out there.
Yeah, there's no perfect referee, but I like Mark Goddard, generally speaking. Again, he's screwed up.
I can't think of too many times he's screwed up recently, though.
I would really have to go through and make sure he's the one who made the errors. I remember, bad stand-ups, but I'm not sure if he's the one who was necessarily responsible for them, so...
Miragliotta. I can think of many instances.
I can think of Miragliotta legitimately taking away fights from a guy.
Yeah, but anyway, on the reset, Poirier goes back to work, gets Alvarez to duck into a knee, and then finishes him along the fence with this really, really beautiful finishing sequence. After he gets Eddie hurt and backing up, he doesn't get wild, thankfully, because Eddie, despite being badly hurt, is on his feet and still throwing back, which was basically what cost Poirier the fight the first time. In that same position, more or less, he got too reckless and Eddie clipped him. Here he stayed more composed, stayed more within himself, and just battered Alvarez with punches and knees and elbows until Alvarez finally fell over. This thing could have been stopped earlier than it was, and I don't think too many people would have complained about it. This is, again, like 5 in a row for Poirier. Well, 3 in a row, but he hasn't lost in his last 5. He's finished his last 3. I mean, if there was any sort of consistency to this division, he'd be fighting for the belt next. But sadly, we're in a weird spot. And we'll get into that in a second. But just on the fight itself, Pat, I'll start with you because we talked a little bit about some of Poirier's bad habits last week when we previewed this. What did you see from both guys here, and what did you think about the fight?
It was fun while it lasted, firstly. But I don't think that was a surprise to any of us. Jeff unfortunately wasn't able to join us because he was, covering arguably the biggest pop culture event of the year. So we missed him, but we know he was having a good time doing that. But I think he would have been in agreement with us that one of the things you see from Poirier that you don't see from Eddie is adjustments on a fight-by-fight basis, especially lately. And I think that's the story of this fight. You pointed out that Poirier came in much more tactical than he did in this fight. I don't know if he thought it was the right idea to go right at Eddie and maybe get some respect from him in their last bout, but he changed the approach this time, and it was working for him. He was doing much better work consistently, especially through that first round, before he got caught up in the second round. Now, you talked about the jab. Poirier was constantly fighting the fight first for position before anything else, and that's why his jab was so effective. He constantly got that outside foot around Eddie's lead foot and trapped him in his striking range. Now, when you factor in he doesn't always have a reach advantage, but he's such a lanky guy that his reach is deceptively long. It kind of makes guys thrown off when they're trying to gauge distance. And when you feint with that lead hand, flex your chest, and constantly pump a jab out, it's a really effective weapon at somebody like Alvarez, who has no interest in fighting on the outside. He wants to get inside and brawl and mix it up, and if he has to, get a clinch on you and take you down. That's the fight he wants to fight. Poirier, for the most part, did not let him get to it. And I think when you saw Eddie essentially go for the takedown after not being guillotined, it was a sign of frustration. And if you didn't bet on that being a sign of frustration, the repeated fouls were clearly such a thing. If anything, if I'm Poirier, when he's doing those things, I not only get angry, but I get confident. Because I know if he's resorting to that stuff, I'm winning the fight, and he doesn't know how to fight against me other than to do this. And once they were back up, I think you saw that mentality from Poirier, and he really just got comfortable very quickly. And the approach to the finish was fantastic. We see so many times guys hurt somebody, rush in, get clipped themselves, and we've got, little mini replays of Barry Czech Congo happening. Learn from that. Don't do that, because Alvarez is still a power hitter, and you don't want to expose yourself to that, especially when he's hurt, because at that point he's going for broke on everything he throws. And if one of them clips you, you could go out. He didn't do that. He stayed patient. He looked for openings. He fought a great fight. And I think as all three of us expected, he came out the winner.
Yeah, Jeff, since you weren't here with us last week, what were your thoughts about this fight going into it? What would your prediction have been? And then your thoughts on the fight?
This is pretty much what I expected, but I didn't expect Alvarez to turn out to be such a dirty fighter. I gave him the benefit of the doubt for the first fight and just thought it was just one of those freak things when he hit a grounded opponent. But, I mean, man, maybe there was some truth to the idea that he was really scared of Poirier and really did not want this fight, because he pulled a lot of dirty crap in this fight that really disappointed me. I don't think Poirier should have gone for that second guillotine attempt. I just think it was a bad idea since he wasn't able to complete it the first time. And it would be a way for Alvarez to get top position, and he'd be giving away top position, which he did. And apparently during the break, Mike Brown told Poirier to stop diving for guillotines, and then Poirier told him F you. Poirier said that. So those are his words. But, I mean, it worked out well for him, and I'm very happy he won. I think Poirier is really one of the most underrated fighters on the roster. He was an elite level featherweight. He was legitimately a top 5 featherweight. Then he moved up, and now he's been pretty consistent at being a top lightweight. And so he's been successful in 2 weight classes in the UFC. I think the only reason he doesn't get enough respect that he's due is because he just hasn't been able to get that title fight.
Yeah.
But now he's beaten 2 former UFC lightweight champions. Had a main event win. I don't think
his fight with Pettis was the main event. I seem to recall.
Right. Right. So he's got 2 main event wins over former UFC champions.
A main event win over Gaethje.
To me, I want to see him fight for the title. Screw Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor is a disgrace to the sport. He's an embarrassment. Poirier has done everything right. I can't see a reason not to give him a title shot. This man has worked and toiled away for years. He came in and beat the guy who was selected to fight Jose Aldo for the title when he came into the UFC. He beat Josh. I know it's a far cry from where Josh Grisby is now, but at one point Josh Grisby was seen as a top up-and-coming featherweight.
Yeah,
he was the guy who was going to fight Jose Aldo for the the UFC featherweight title in 2011, and then Grisby lost that fight, and then his career and his entire life went down the toilet. It's neither here nor there, but my point is that Poirier has been a great fighter in 2 weight classes for years, and I don't know if this win is going to get them the respect he's due, but I think he's definitely due it, and I think he's due it now, and I want to see him fight for the title.
Well, I think he's finally showing consistency. The biggest problem with him was he was never able to consistently score those wins without a hiccup somewhere along the way. Whether it was he's gone on nice winning streaks before. He has, but when it's been a critical time for him to step up and just put that signature win on, he's fallen short. And I'm not.
The Chan Sung Jung fight would be a great example of that.
Yeah, falling short against. I feel like when he falls short against elite competition. Cub Swanson,
not so much. Cub, not so much. Conor, absolutely. The Michael Johnson fight was one that really took him off the rails, unfortunately. Yeah. And he just happened to play Johnson's game in that fight.
Well, after that Johnson lost, he started this current run.
Yeah.
But this is what I'm saying. This is his best consistent run against the best level of opposition.
Johnson is an utter disappointment to me. Don't get me wrong. Johnson, Johnson's career to me is mind-boggling. But Johnson is a guy you can't always sleep on, and Johnson himself has had spurts where he's been unbelievable.
Well, I'm not saying Johnson's a better fighter than him, but he fought that fight and played Johnson's game, and that's ultimately what cost him. Went at Johnson at the only time Johnson's really viable in a fight, which was stupid. And
after those losses, I feel Poirier always improves. He's always gotten better.
He's made steady improvements now more than ever, and it's visible in his fights. That's what's been he hasn't been able to do that every time. The Zombie and the Cub losses, I think they were one fight apart. He had a win sandwich in the middle.
Between those, he beat Jonathan Brookins, which means nothing.
Right. He took a fight with Brookins, and then the fight with Cub, that would have launched one guy up further the card, which it wound up being for Cub for a little while. And then he notched 3 wins together against lesser opposition, fought Conor, and Conor beat him. Okay. So he got knocked down the ladder again, and then he decided to move up to lightweight, and he fought some, okay lightweights. Had a real good win over Bobby Green, where if he could have followed it up, he probably would have been in good position, but then he ran into Michael Johnson. Now is the best run of his career. Beats Miller, which whatever, beating Jim Miller in 2017, okay, not really meaning anything. He has the fight with Alvarez that went to a no contest that he looked like he was on the way to winning to most of us. Then he beats Pettis. That's a good win. Knocks out Gagey. That's another very good win. And this win over Eddie is really one that is saying, hey, this guy's here. It's time. Like, give him something.
Interim title fight with Tony Ferguson. Which will then be stripped 6 weeks later.
Yeah, I mean, again, if there was anything approaching consistency in this division, this would get Dustin Poirier a title shot. Sadly, we're currently mired in the McGregor nonsense.
The WME era.
I mean, let's be clear about this. I don't think Khabib would have any problem fighting Dustin Poirier. I believe Khabib would fight anyone. I mean, yeah, Khabib would fight Brock Lesnar over a sandwich. All right, I mean, Khabib's that kind of guy.
Fought peers. Khabib would probably fight an amoeba in a petri dish.
If it looked at him wrong, yeah. I mean,
as long as he can make weight.
And it's one of the things I like about Khabib is, I mean, some of his struggles with weight and that string of injuries aside, he'll fight pretty much anybody. I mean, think about the position he was put in when, Tony fell out of their last fight. And this is, I mean, him and Tony both are this way.
Fought Ally Kenta.
Well, I mean, he signed to fight Max Holloway.
Yeah.
On, obscenely short notice and against a guy who's a very different style of fighter from Tony and has a real chance of beating him. When that fell through, he signed to fight a guy with no attributes similar to either Tony or Max on, 2 days' notice. On the biggest stage of his career.
Probably not even that.
Yeah. And again, on the biggest stage of his career, with everything to lose if Iaquinta happens to land that punch, which is all he's got. But if he does land it, he's knocked people out. And again, I mean, Tony's, a couple of times when, either when Khabib fell out and he's, yeah, sure, I'll fight this, no-name Lando Venata. Yeah, why not? And nearly gets knocked out, but proceeds to win anyway because they're just crazy like that. So I kind of hope we get Poirier and Khabib. I struggle to see Conor.
Stranger things have happened.
I struggle to see Conor coming to terms in a reasonable timeline. I want Tony Ferguson to be fully healthy. And
Conor McGregor's a disgrace. He disgraced this sport. He's a coward. He's a scumbag.
More on that later.
Yeah, a little bit more on that later, actually, because
he's a felon.
No, he's not.
No, he's not.
He's not a felon. He escaped felony charges.
To me, he's a felon.
Felony being a felon is a very strict. It falls under a very strict legal definition. Conor does not fit the bill for me. So, anyway, again, great main event. A lot of fun. A lot of
disorderly conduct. He's disorderly, and his conduct is terrible.
I would not contest either of those claims.
No, and I don't think and technically he didn't in court either, but we'll get there eventually tonight.
I'm trying to think what you want to do with Eddie Alvarez next.
Rematch with Gagey.
No. Hasn't Gagey... I want Gagey and Barboza. I'm very
This was the last fight on Alvarez's contract. He could be going back to Bellator next week.
Yeah, that's...
He could. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me because at least Bellator has been willing to throw around the money lately.
Didn't he burn that bridge pretty badly, though?
He might finally get the trilogy fight with Chandler. The trilogy.
No, we had the trilogy fight with Chandler.
No, they've only fought twice.
Why? They were supposed to, but it never materialized.
Oh, that's right.
And to be fair, Chandler choked him out the first time and should have won the decision the second, but judges being what they are. We might see that. He might. I don't know. If he stays with the UFC,
There are guys. I mean, he's at lightweight. There are guys he can fight.
Bobby Green.
Bobby Green. Oh, you know what? I would love to see him fight if Mairbek Taisimov wins his next fight. Because Taisimov is signed to fight a nobody for the UFC Moscow card. Desmond Green, actually, now that I think about it.
Is Kevin Lee lined up yet?
I don't think Kevin Lee has a fight. That would work.
I like that fight a lot. Let me see.
I don't know that I would put, if I'm Eddie's people, I would put him in with Kevin Lee at this point.
I mean...
You got okay, here we go. We got Dan Hooker, who's for some reason is still only 14.
Ally Quinta, if they can come to an agreement, maybe.
That would be a good one, too, Jeff.
One.
Or even McDessie winning last night, just because he's an action-style fighter.
That's not a bad... I don't
James
dislike
Vick's
the
got a
matchup.
fight coming up, right?
I don't dislike the matchup, but, you know...
If James Vick
It's
wins
like,
his next
what kind of fight... It's like, what kind of fight does Eddie Alvarez want? Because he and his fans that complain that he always gets tough matchups. So, I mean, if you're fighting in the UFC, like, okay, do you not want to be fighting big names, or do you want to be fighting easier to make it? Like, what do you want exactly? Do you want Francisco Trinaldo, or do you want someone in the top 10?
You know, if James Vick beats Justin Gaethje in a couple of weeks, I could see Vick and Alvarez.
I could see. I mean, again, there are tons of good. There are really, if Alvarez,
again, like
there are tons of good matchups.
The reason I
this
bring
is
up
why
Taisimov is
great.
that the reason I bring up Taisimov is that Taisimov is unranked.
I like,
but
stupid. I mean, I like all those matchups, Robert. I mean, lightweight is a competitive, bloodthirsty division where guys who are unranked could probably beat. You know, just because of matchups, could probably beat guys in the top 10.
Yeah,
it's that competitive. You know?
So there's options, assuming he sticks around the UFC. And I kind of hope he does. I do like watching Eddie Alvarez fight generally. So
me too. When he's not being a dirty scumbag.
Yeah, even then, it's still entertaining.
I think he's got a... I don't know. I think becoming UFC champion gave him a big, undeserved head. Right. He still lost to Donald Cerrone.
You know, if you could do that rematch.
I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to that either, even though the first fight wasn't like fireworks.
No, but that assumes Donald wants to come back down to lightweight, and I think he's happy at welterweight not cutting as much weight. Speaking of not cutting as much weight, a guy who will probably wind up at lightweight in the nearest future, Jose Aldo, got back on the winning side of things after his 2-fight series with Max Holloway, where he was pretty badly finished both times. And he defeats Jeremy Stevens via TKO in the first round.
His first finish in the octagon since August 2013 against Korean Zombie.
Since the Zombie dislocated his own shoulder. I do. It's a finish.
All right. If you don't want to count that one, his last finish was
the first Mendez fight.
The first Mendez fight in January 2012. Good for Aldo.
Hey, when you fight only the best, it's tough. It's really tough. This was, I think, a good representation of where Aldo is in his career right now. I said last week on the show I was favoring Stevens.
I was too when this fight got announced.
There was no official roundtable for this, and this might sound quasi-revisionist on my part. I would have been leaning towards Aldo had I made that pick. Because I went back and I rewatched the Aldo and Holloway fights. And something that Pat mentioned last week stuck with me, that Aldo still looked like Aldo when he fought Max Holloway. Max Holloway was just better. And something that I think Daniel Cormier
didn't look
mentioned,
like the old Jose Aldo to me, but I thought he looked okay.
Yeah, some of this was, and I don't know that I fell into this trap, but I want to put it out there as a possibility. I might not have been giving Max Holloway his proper due in terms of what he did to Jose Aldo. Because just because Max Holloway was able to do it doesn't mean everyone can do it. And Max, And it's really a disservice to Max Holloway if you look at at his fights with Aldo and go, well, Aldo's a little bit past his prime, and Max Holloway just kept up a good pace, et cetera, which is a horrible, criminal almost, oversimplification of the brilliance of Max Holloway in those fights. And here, Jose Aldo was fighting a guy who does not do what troubles him. I mean, he got clipped a little bit early, but if you rewatch the sequence when Aldo is on the fence and Jeremy's teeing off on him,
he's really not getting hit cleanly.
Not at all. I mean, Aldo's head movement and upper body movement in that flurry was really brilliant.
In addition to using his elbows to pick off a lot of the punches coming at an upward angle at him.
Yeah. And Stevens, to his credit, backed off because I don't think Aldo hit him with anything during that flurry. He just realized he wasn't getting anywhere and backed off rather than completely punch himself out. Unfortunately, as soon as he did so, he really slowed down, and there's a couple of things that I think contributed to that. One, he and Aldo exchanged a few leg kicks, and Jeremy Stevens has good leg kicks as well. But I think Aldo might have hit him just right on one of them and kind of messed with his leg a little bit. And then Aldo started landing his straight right. I mean, his jab was on point as always, but he started splitting Stevens' guard with a really fast, again, just straight right hand that seemed to befuddle Stevens pretty handily because he was not the same after getting hit with that a couple of times. Then, of course, the finishing sequence, Aldo throws the right, but he's not really throwing the right. It's more to get Stevens to bring his guard up so that he can land this haymaker left to the body that, I mean, that must have been... Aldo threw that from his soul. I mean, you watch Jeremy Stevens take that punch and immediately just kind of crumple. I mean, Jeremy Stevens has been hit hard through his entire career to both the head and the body. And I don't know if it was placement or timing or
He's
power.
only been knocked out one other time.
Yeah. But Aldo just hit him just right with everything he had and finished him on the mat from there. I mean, again, this was Aldo looking about as good as he's going to look at this stage of his career. He's not the same guy he used to be, for better and for worse. But he's still one of the 3 or 4 best featherweights in the world. I mean, the fact that he can't beat Max Holloway is not a huge knock on him. Max Holloway is the best featherweight in the world right now. And if he can get his health sorted out, he can easily be the best featherweight ever. That's how highly I think of Max Holloway. But it was good to see Aldo be Aldo, essentially, again. I mean, I've kind of missed that guy. And much as he showed up for the Holloway fights, he was just outmatched and outthought in a lot of respects by a guy who is, again, one of the 3 best fighters in the world, regardless of weight class. Jeff, I'll start with you for this one. Again, you mentioned you were leaning towards Stevens. I mean, what'd you think of the fight? Jeff, you there?
Yep.
Sorry, I was still on mute.
Okay.
I thought it was a good fight. I disagree with Sarah Kaufman that I don't think Jose Aldo looked like the old Jose Aldo here, but I thought it was a strong performance where it looked like Stevens was able to light him up a little bit, but he was able to counter and find those openings, and maybe Stevens was a little too reckless. But man, that body shot. I feel like the body shot, I feel in MMA far too often we see fighters headhunting, and we see if you know how to go to the body, it's very effective. Right, Robert?
More effective in some cases because it's harder to defend.
Exactly. And I just think it does say something about Aldo when, at this point in his career, when he's coming off back-to-back losses, even though they're against Max Holloway, that he can do something against a guy like Stevens who's been in the midst of one of the best run of his career, where he was solidly in the top 5, I would say, of the division. And again, Stevens has had sort of a journeyman type career, but only one other guy knocked him out before. So, and that was Yves Edwards, and that was almost 6 years ago.
And that was really just a perfect counterpunch from
Right.
Yves that Stevens didn't see coming. He face planted. I remember
So-
that finish.
Yeah, so to me, it's not like Stevens is a ham and egger. I thought it was a really impressive finishing sequence. I don't know where Aldo wants to go from here. Apparently, I don't know if he's planning on finishing out his contract or signing a new one and seeing where things land. I don't know if he's thinking about moving up to lightweight for the tail end of his UFC run. But, you know, there are fights they could make for him going forward. And look, I mean, just with, we don't know. I don't know. I mean, we assume that the next fight will be Ortega versus Holloway at some point, but depending on how things land, it might have to be Aldo versus Ortega. Who knows?
Or the interim title. Because why not?
Or the vacant title.
God, don't put that out there, because that means something serious went wrong with Holloway. And
Well, we still don't know. We've heard things, but even what we've heard from Dana White is hardly substantive. So it could be. I don't want the title to be vacated, but I have no idea. I'm just keeping all the possibilities open.
That's fair. Pat, again, you were picking Aldo last week. Did this go about how you expected it to, or were there some wrinkles along the way?
It went quicker than I expected, and I'm not saying that to knock Jeremy Stevens in any way. I think most people who've listened to this show know that I've really been on the Jeremy Stevens praise bandwagon and really complimenting what he's done lately. That being said, Jose Aldo, you know, I made the comment last week. He still, to me, was Jose Aldo when he fought Max Holloway. He just fought a guy who was better. He did things in this fight that he did against Max Holloway, specifically the left hook to the body. He threw that punch well against Max Holloway when they fought. More so the first time than the second time because Max made adjustments. Which, again, as I pointed out, just like Eddie Alvarez, Jose Aldo is not a creature who makes adjustments or makes them well. But he's so good at what he does, it's oftentimes only the very best guys can beat him. And that's what you saw with Max Holloway. I don't think Jose is anything close to washed up or beaten than what we saw. I think that he just fought the best guy around and got beat and doesn't know or doesn't have the proper people around him to show him why he got beaten, where he could have done better. In addition to Max Holloway being very, very good. You know, he fought Jeremy a little bit smarter. He was on the lookout for offense coming at him. And I think maybe he's realizing as he's starting to get up in age and experience that possibly he needs to stop relying on his athletic qualities, which especially in his prime were just uncannily impressive. The stuff he was able to do against elite level featherweights like Frankie Edgar, like Chad Mendez,
Faber.
Uriah Faber. It was unbelievable the stuff he was able to do.
He bulldozed Mike Brown.
Abused Mike Brown. The 8-second double knee to Cub Swanson, to double flying knee, excuse me. You know, he could do those things. But I think he's realizing as he's getting older, which a lot of guys don't, that I need to rely more on technique and what I can actually apply versus freak athleticism and taking these wild chances that somebody's not good enough to make me pay for. He's come across somebody now who has the ability to make him pay for it in Max, and he made him do it twice. And that maybe woke up something a little smarter in Jose. Because, again, if you look at the flurry where Stevens has him pinned against the cage, Jeremy Stevens doesn't really land anything cleanly. He's hitting a lot of gloves, a lot of shoulders, and a lot of elbows. He's not really hitting Jose. And going into this, you know, people still talk about Jose's leg kicks as his best offensive weapon. I would argue that his left hook to the body is his most damaging single offensive weapon. And the reason I'll say that is not only because of what he did against Jeremy Stevens, but if you look at the best success he had against Max Holloway offensively, it was that particular strike that did it. And it's set up well by his straight right hand that he was throwing early and often, had the timing on it, and once he had the timing on it and you saw Jeremy Stevens visibly not sure of how to deal with it, other than to just bite, duck down, and try to duck out of it, he bent into that left hook and left his body exposed, trying to keep his guard up. And maybe the stoppage was a little bit early here, but I had no issue with it. I know some were saying that it should have been more of a chance for Jeremy to recover, but you're not going to recover from a body shot like that thinking, if you're still absorbing shots, which he was. And we've seen Jose, when he gets somebody on the ground, what he can do. It doesn't happen often, but when he gets that top position against you on the ground, you are in bad, bad trouble, just like we saw him do to Mike Brown years ago. He's still got the ability to do that.
Aldo's grappling is perpetually underrated. People, unless you're big into jiu-jitsu, may not remember this, but he beat Cobrinho as a brown belt at the world level, I seem to recall. And Cobrinho, one of the best for a significant period of time. I mean, Aldo can grapple.
And he's very underrated in terms of just raw physical strength. He's a strong featherweight. Remember that Chad Mendes had him waist locked from behind, and he literally pulled his hands apart.
Yep.
That's not something that's an easy feat to accomplish. He did that. So when he's got control and he has control of your body, you're in a lot of trouble. I still think Jose Aldo is an elite-level fighter. I think he just has the misfortune right now of fighting at the same time as Max Holloway, who I don't think is ever going to make the adjustments to fight well enough to beat. But would I be averse to seeing it again? Not if he puts together 2 or 3 more wins like this at featherweight. As far as him at lightweight, I don't know that that's something he wants to do.
It might have to happen after they vacate the title and he fights Brian Ortega.
But that's the thing. If there's a situation that arises where he can say, hey, I could be a 2-division world champion, well, why wouldn't you jump at that?
God, now I'm thinking about Aldo and Ortega.
I feel like now would be a good time if he wanted to, but maybe he doesn't seem, based on the post-fight press conference, he didn't seem too eager or anxious to want to make a change right now. He seems comfortable where he is at this point.
If he's got the weight thing figured out,
sure.
And that was the big thing for him, was that's not an easy cut for him to make.
Same thing with Joanna. Joanna doesn't seem interested in doing a move either.
She's wasting her time, though. Aldo's nearing the end of his career. I mean, if he fights for another 4 years, I'd be surprised. Joanna's got another 3 to 4 years in her, and right now I feel she's just wasting time at strawweight, but we'll get to that when we get to her fight.
Aldo probably could fight another 4 years.
I think he's still able to beat any featherweight other than Max Holloway.
I don't know. I mean, now that I'm thinking about him and Ortega, I am bizarrely compelled by that fight now.
I love that fight, but I still think he can beat Ortega.
He can. I can easily see him winning that fight. I can see him losing it too, but
it's an interesting fight. I think we might have to see that fight. Let's strip Max Holloway and make that fight happen, guys.
I'm in.
I hate you all. All right. Moving on. Speaking of Joanna, former champion. Still Joanna violence. Joanna Jędrzejczyk defeats Tisha Torres via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the board. This went as expected. Torres has good enough footwork to not do what Jessica Andrade did, which was just get led around by the nose, essentially, and get beat up the whole time. But she's not good enough at distance or has enough power in her strikes to really trouble Joanna.
She's not good enough at very much, Robert.
No, and she's used to getting to the clinch and then being able to work you from there, and she could not beat Joanna in the clinch either. I mean, Jack Slack put this out on Twitter, and I laughed because I think it's true. Tisha Torres even gets beaten up boringly. I mean, there's just not a whole lot compelling there. Again, this went about as expected, I thought.
Yeah, our own Andrew Graham shared that post from Jack Slack. Literally, quote, Jesus Christ, Tisha Torres even manages to get beat up boringly. And it should be Andrew, who's a Calgarian, was there last night.
He was.
In attendance.
And I have nothing against Tisha Torres as a person. I think she's, a very nice, approachable individual. I think she's very level-headed. But just as a fighter and as an athlete, she is probably one of the most boring female fighters I've ever seen in UFC history.
You can say boring fighters in general.
Maybe one of the most boring fighters in history. I'm sorry, Tisha, but them's just the truth.
It's one of those things where she's, it's almost like she's somebody who goes to the gym and understands things that you're supposed to do and does enough of them where she doesn't look completely out of her element, but has no idea how to push the rest of it to actually be successful at anything.
I'm struggling to come up with a couple of counterpoints, because at least there's a few of these. I mean, there are some other, just bad fighters or female fighters, but sometimes when they lose, it's at least interesting. I mean, Angela Magana sucks, but at least she gets the crap kicked out of her.
Tisha Torres would be somebody I'd bring into my fighter's camp as a sparring partner, because I know she is not going to do enough stupid things to be easy, but I know that she's also not going to trouble my fighter or potentially hurt them going into the fight. It's a good workout.
Yeah, that's fair. And Joanna still seems to want to stick around at strawweight, which I just said it. I think that's a waste of everyone's time.
Robert, do you think Joanna is just worried about moving up and not being as strong or as big as some of the competition?
It might be part of it might be that. I also think she's got a massive chip on her shoulder now about about the losses to Rose, and she can't square current reality with her perception. And I just, again, this was a good fight from her. It was what she does normally, but she didn't show. And in all fairness, Tisha's not the type of fighter to make you have to show if you have adjusted to these things. The reason Rose was able to beat Joanna, there's three. There's three things that are really key to Rose's continued success against Joanna. One is feints. She is able to draw the counters out of Joanna at a safe distance, which not a lot of other people have done. Everyone else is either overly committing, or they're feinting from too far away, or there's not enough mobility there. There's just something that is keeping their feints from being effective. By contrast, Rose's feints are always getting Joanna to bite on them. Rose's footwork is surprisingly good. She does a little bit of the, not as well, mind you, but she has kind of the Lomachenko hop going on when she gets into the pocket. Now, again, as good as Lomachenko, no one is. But that's pretty clearly the inspiration for what she does with her feet when she gets close to an opponent. And that always, it throws off Joanna's distance, it throws off her timing, and it throws off her accuracy. And then Rose just hits pretty hard. And she's able to that string of things is perfectly set up to capitalize on everything Joanna does, both good and bad. And I don't think she showed anything that makes me think another fight would go any differently. I would like to see her. I mean, really, she's not going to get another shot at Rose. Let's be clear here. She has wins over. She's currently the number one contender according to the rankings, and she has beaten numbers 2 through 6 decisively. It's just a weird spot, and I would like to see her take at least one fight up at flyweight, even if it's just a trial. Just let's see what happens. You still want to go back down and fight at strawweight again? Fine. Because if Rose loses the title while she takes a fight at flyweight, she can come back down and have an immediate case for, like Jessica Andrade. If Andrade beats Namajunas, and I'm not saying she will, but she has ways to do it pretty clearly, then Joanna has an immediate case for a title shot because she schooled Andrade pretty heavily when they fought. But instead, we're just in a weird holding pattern here now with this division. And I would just rather see her try her hand at flyweight. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But the division's in a pretty bad state of limbo right now, and it's not again, this is not entirely her fault, but her decisions are a contributing factor.
Basically, we don't need Joanna hanging around and taking out other contenders for Thug Rose when another rematch with Thug Rose is probably not in the cards right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, not even close.
All right. Was there anything else either of you had for this fight that you wanted to touch on?
Pat?
No.
All right. And,
I did.
okay, go ahead.
Tisha Torres cemented her gatekeeper status with that performance, and the fight sucked.
All right, moving on. We had Alexander Hernandez defeating Olivier Aubin-Mercier via unanimous decision. 130-27 that I thought was questionable, and then two 29-28s, which was what I had. It's interesting to see because prior to this, our only introduction to Hernandez was a 40-some-odd second victory over Beneil Dariush, which is impressive, but anybody can win in 4-ounce gloves in 40 seconds. There's not a lot of tape there, necessarily. We have more now, and I think we have a better feel for this guy. He came out of the gate strong and hard, had some success, but when it became apparent that he couldn't just steamroll Aubin-Mercier with strikes, there was a lot of clinching, there was a lot of fighting for occasional takedowns, a few scrambles here and there. And in fairness to Hernandez, he is young, there's plenty of time to improve, but I appreciated the win, but I think we have a much better sense of where he is right now as a fighter, and it's not the level that... It is not representative of the number he currently holds as far as the rankings go. But he's certainly another good addition to the division, all things considered. Pat, because you hadn't seen much on Hernandez prior to this. I mean, neither had I, in all fairness. But what did you think about the fight now that you've actually seen him fight for 15 minutes?
He's not bad. I wasn't walking away saying, man, I need to see more of this guy. But I think he just had a good understanding of everything that Mercier was trying to do with him. And Mercier, despite the, what's the word I want to use, unorthodox ways he tries to do things, someone who's more competent and gets good sparring in and has a good understanding of fighting is going to be able to see those things coming and know how to either avoid them entirely or counter them. And I think that's what Hernandez did. I think he fought a reserved, more smart fight. And Mercier didn't understand how to fight against anything he was doing.
All right. Jeff, your thoughts on this one? Are we being too hard on Hernandez necessarily in victory over a tough guy?
I have nothing to add.
All right. As for the rest of this event, the prelims did not close out strong. Jordan Mean defeated Alex Morono via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board. There was nothing here. Both guys were flappy and sloppy with their boxing. Mean was just able to get takedowns, and Morono had nothing from guard. Hakeem Dawodu defeated Austin Arnett via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the board. Two notes about this. According to Andrew, Dawodu's win got probably the biggest pop of the night. And that's largely because he is a native Calgarian, and apparently there's not a lot of fighters based out of Calgary. This was terrible. I mean, Arnett was like he looked like a sparring partner or a heavy bag. And I remarked at one point in the second round, because Arnett came out in the second round and had a good minute or so, and then went back to being abused, and I thought, oh, he did just enough to avoid the accusations of throwing the fight. Good for him. Nothing here. Islam Makhachev with a sadly unappreciated win.
That was a great armbar.
Submits Kajan Johnson with an armbar. This was a beautiful armbar from Makhachev. He got Johnson down, mounted the leg.
That guy is underrated.
Seriously underrated. His mount was beautiful. I mean, mount's not a fully appreciated art form in MMA because a lot of guys know how to bridge and hip escape and shrimp. His mount was great. He got high, he landed punches, he isolated an arm, he moved to S mount when he needed to stabilize his position when Johnson was trying to push off of the cage. Landed more punches, rolled for the armbar, released his legs because one of the arms was trapped, readjusted, broke the grip, and it was a beautiful armbar, a beautiful display of grappling.
He used that opposite arm as a fulcrum to get the armbar going.
He did. It was so great. Makhachev only has one loss professionally. It's in the UFC. He just kind of got caught when he was fighting Adriano Martins. This is now 4 in a row for him. The last 2 have been finishes. He called out Tony Ferguson after this fight, and I applaud the moxie on anyone who's willing to call out Tony Ferguson, because I think the only people I've heard do it are now him and Khabib, who have both said, yeah, bring me Al Kukui. And, if Tony wants a warm-up fight, and bear in mind, this is not a tune-up fight, but if he wants a fight other than Khabib when he comes back from injury, I'm completely down for him and Makhachev. I think he wins, but the guy called out one of the biggest dogs in the yard, and that should be rewarded. Iwan Kutelaba made me look like an idiot.
This fucked up.
This was hilarious. First of all, Kutelaba coming out to Bret Hart's WWE entrance theme was great, and wearing the Hitman sunglasses. It's a good way to suck up to the crowd. Did not give the glasses to a fan sitting cage side, though. Heel move. Defeats Gadzhimurad Antigulov via TKO in the first round. I was relatively high on Antigulov going into this fight, and as soon as he got that double leg, I kind of figured he was on his way to victory, because that's his bread and butter is the grappling. Then he just couldn't ever fight wrist control when Kutelaba got it. He couldn't pass effectively. I was shocked at how ineffective he was. And then once they got in the clinch, Kutelaba, just being a crazy man and kind of wild, worked in his favor as he just wouldn't stop throwing until Antigulov fell over. And Kutelaba immediately called out Daniel Cormier, which was hilarious. And I appreciate Cormier's response on commentary, which was something to the effect of, I appreciate the call-out, that's what you're supposed to do on the mic, but you've got no chance of beating me. Which is also, I believe, accurate. Then on Fight Pass, John McDessie defeated Ross Pearson via unanimous decision, 30-26, 29-27, and 29-28. I think the third round was the one that they were giving to McDessie 10-8. This was a good scrap. This was your official fight of the night, and I have no issue with that. McDessie just smoother, straighter with his punches, had a good read on everything. On everything Pearson was trying to do, and kept countering him the whole time. So, really good stuff from McDessie. Another terrible fight, Caitlin Chikagian defeated Alexis Davis via unanimous decision, 130-27, which I took issue with, and then 2 29-28, which I did not. Not a good fight. Although, I will say this about Chikagian, she is getting better. She's not just ki-eyeing and hitting air anymore, which was all she did in her last fight. It drove me up the wall. She actually did stuff this time, so credit to her for that. Dustin Ortiz defeats Mateus Nicolau via head kick and punches in the first round. I've always struggled to really get a handle on Ortiz, because I've sung his praises at times, and then he can't do anything against Wilson Hayes or Jussier Formiga. Good stuff from him here. He kept doing a lot of stance switching to set up his kicks. He got tagged a few times, but he had a better feel for the distance and his ability to close it than Nicolau did, and then landed a head kick through the one-handed guard. Need two hands, guys. And finished off Nicolau on the mat, so good stuff from Ortiz. Nina Ansaroff defeated Randa Marcos via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board. This fight also kind of sucked. And kicking everything off, Devin Powell defeated Alvaro Herrera via body kick. This was really an interesting setup to the finish. Powell had kind of been pressured to the fence. He switched from orthodox to southpaw to angle off. Landed a really solid left body kick that clearly had Powell hurt and backing up. He went back to orthodox, chased him down, hit a switch kick to the body, and that was basically the end of it. So I don't care if either guy stays in the UFC, but it was a nice finishing sequence, at least from Powell. All right, Jeff, I'll start with you as far as the rest of these go. Anything that you really liked from this group? Anything that you were looking forward to?
Islam Makhachev, man, that guy is going places. He is, I think, one of the hottest prospects at lightweight right now, and he keeps looking good each time out. And I really hope that's it for Ross Pearson's UFC career. So thank you to John McDessie if he did that.
All right. Pat, how about you? Again, we previewed this last week, so what came through, what didn't? Any talking points you wanted to touch on?
Makhachev really eye-opening win for a lot of people, myself included. Just great high-level jiu-jitsu that you don't see on a fight card basis, unfortunately. Really, really enjoyed that. And McDessie Pearson, from what I got to see of it, Ross Pearson still just steps into the way of punches deliberately at this point. And really, he doesn't need to continue to take beatings like this. He's a member of the Alliance camp with Dominic Cruz and those guys. He's made a fair amount of money in his UFC career. He can probably afford at this point to step back and just work as a coach or a sparring partner. He doesn't need to continue to go in there and just absorb a lot of punishment, especially in the short amount of time he's been in the UFC. He's been in a lot of just brawls where he's gotten the worst of it. You don't want to see that continually happen to somebody.
Well, he's been in the UFC for a while now.
I mean, we're talking 2009, I think it was. He won his season of Tough. So in a 9-year career, he's absorbed about 20 years' worth of beatings.
That's pretty fair. And, I mean, again, he's had some good runs here and there, but he's about a 500 UFC fighter, I think. I'd really have to do all the math.
His record is abysmal.
If we're talking just in the UFC, I think it is losing, especially recently. I mean, again, he's won.
And to be fair to him, there are some questionable calls involved there. But at the same time, when you have to lean on that to try to get your record to 500, it's not exactly a good sign.
Yeah, and again, there were a few questionable ones that went his way as well, so hard to say there. But, and again, he's 1-5 in his last 6. I mean, and that one win is over Mizuto Hirota. What are we doing here? Anyway, that was, again, UFC on Fox 30. Before we move on, again, this was the best card of the last month or so, all things considered. And yet, Again, according to the overnights, it has drawn the lowest rating of any of these UFC on Fox events. And some of them were doozies, as far as low numbers go. I mean, like Condit and Maya did almost nothing. I was kind of surprised because the Fox deal is coming to its end. There's only one more UFC on Fox event. And the UFC didn't put on a stinker. They put on a good card. And yet, for some reason, was this just a promotion thing? Was just no one aware of this event?
Granted, I don't watch a lot of Fox programming until they bring back Last Man Standing this fall, but I don't recall seeing a heavy amount of promotion for this card, especially considering the names involved when you've got 3 former world champions in your top 3 bouts. I didn't see a lot of promotion for it on that end. Also, there's the principle of if you keep shoveling shit to people, they're not going to expect gold after you do it enough times.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. Jeff, how about you? Any reason that you can think of why this thing just doesn't seem to have drawn well despite being an excellent card?
I mean,
this was not even a sellout at the venue.
I don't think the marketing is what it was under the Zuffa era. I don't think if you really get right down to it, has the UFC marketing and promotional efforts been as strong as what they were under the Zuffa banner? I don't think they have.
Only for shows few and far between.
Yeah.
Have they made a concentrated effort to really try to put promotion out for it? And this definitely was not one of them.
Now, granted, Robert, overnight numbers don't tell the whole story.
I'm aware.
So we're only going strictly by. I mean, because sometimes the overnights look better. Sometimes they look worse. So I don't want to. But going by these, and I think the second problem is I feel like the UFC and WME, IMG, I think they're only giving the big marketing push to a scant few, and I think that's a big problem.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And
yeah, I mean, they didn't even sell out this place locally. There were only 10,000 people, 10,600 and change.
I mean, that's not a terrible house.
No, but
really.
they were. But again, this comes from Andrew. That when people were arriving, they were actively just being promoted to better seats.
My other thing is, like, Johnny Hendricks is not a top star now, but when he was coming up and having his run, I feel like he was a bigger draw. You know, he was a decent sized draw, as I recall. He wasn't like a George St. Pierre, but he could draw money, he could draw attendance, right?
I think that depends. That's a weird one.
Well, I'm just saying, I feel like the money was spread around a lot more from like 2008 to at least 2015. I feel like the money was spread around a lot more. And I feel like they're not. I feel they're not. Maybe they're too much in debt right now because of the purchase.
The ESPN deal's basically going to fix that.
But I feel like they're not spending money to make money. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean.
And now maybe that's a dead cliche, but I feel like they're not. I feel like they're not spreading the money around, and they're not. I feel like these fighters are not getting promoted. I feel like the only person who's promoting himself right now is Conor McGregor, and he's not even fighting.
That's fair.
And that's a big problem to me.
Well,
and
before we jump,
I'm not gonna condemn the UFC for bringing back Brock Lesnar for those promotional efforts, but to me, there's just been not enough marketing muscle that I feel like they used to have, even when they were still running too many events.
Yeah, I want to use that to dovetail into 227 before we talk about the actual fights. Because, again, we have 227 coming up, and, again, the top two fights, your main event is the rematch between Cody Garbrandt and TJ Dillashaw for the bantamweight title. And then you have the rematch between Mighty Mouse and Henry Cejudo for the flyweight title. Now, again, with this doing, again, based on the numbers we have so far, so poorly, and I mean, even though we're just going on overnights, I have a hard time imagining this thing shooting up into, the top 5 most viewed events on Fox ever. They didn't really even do a whole lot to promote 227 on this card. I mean, they had a pre-recorded satellite interview between Dillashaw and Garbrandt where they did the same thing they did in everything leading up to their first fight, which is tiring.
Do you have a marketing team right now? I just don't know.
I mean, it's kind of it's sad in some respects.
I can't do the UFC's job for them. This is their job. And to me, the marketing efforts, just in my opinion, have gone way down ever since the WME IMG purchase.
I mean,
way
the UFC's
down.
Promotional efforts were never. I mean, again, the majority of them have never been all that great, but every now and then they completely, hit it out of the park.
I just feel like they're waiting for the next Ronda Rousey or Conor McGregor, which, part of that is on the fighters, but I feel like they have to spend money to promote these guys a little bit more and get a feel for who the audience is into. And I don't feel they're doing that.
Yeah, I'm genuinely... It's one of the things about 227 that intrigues me, is the last time Dillashaw and Garbrandt fought, they were, I believe, the co-main. They might have been third from the top for the GSP and
Bisping
event, which was which did over 1 million buys, generally speaking.
Well, you had the return of George St. Pierre.
Yeah, they were the co-main for that fight.
Right.
Well, it did 875,000 buys. Okay.
Neither guy was a proven pay-per-view draw.
And they still aren't.
That's my interesting thing here is they were just seen by a lot of people in theory. So in theory. In theory. And I wonder how much of that, extra they will have, how much extra they will have gained from that exposure.
Cruz versus Garbrandt was the co-main to Nunes versus Rousey in December 2016, which did over 1 million, but that's because you had Ronda Rousey on that card.
Yeah. So at this point, you've had Garbrandt as co-main to 2 big events, and I don't know.
I mean, this is a grudge match, so maybe this fight might surprise us, but we'll see.
In theory, this one should be easy to sell itself.
But is ESPN going to do? I mean, is ESPN going to promote this fight like on SportsCenter the day of?
They'll do about 5 minutes of promotion for it.
I mean, to me, that's head scratching because they're the broadcast partner, are they not?
Not until 19.
But even beforehand,
I understand what Jeff's saying. They're going to want to get a good return on their investment. Start now.
I mean, the ESPN, Robert, was not a broadcast partner in 2012 when Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen happened, and they were running programming for that fight all throughout the day. I was there.
Remember too, though, the popularity of MMA is vastly different now than it was then.
Right.
Also true.
Right, but I was there in Las Vegas the day that fight happened, and they were running. They were hyping up that fight card all throughout the day on ESPN.
I think part of it though is that again the popularity, especially of that particular grudge between Sonnen and Silva. That was one that was transcendent of MMA, so ESPN had a duty to cover that to a certain extent.
Right.
Now,
this isn't that level of grudge, but why can't it be? Why can't it not be?
Well,
because neither guy's a great. Contrary to the way they talk to each other, neither guy has the presentation skills that Sonnen does. And much as I hate Sonnen,
and that's the main issue.
Mm.
I mean, again, not a fan of Sonnen, but. And I find his trash talk cringeworthy, but he knows how to present it in such a way that it connects with a lot of people. These two, it's slinging profanity and personal insults.
You could still have more, I'm not saying you have to do the level that ESPN did, but I still feel like you could have more.
I honestly, this would have been one where it would have really benefited from them doing like an hour special, a half an hour with each guy presenting their side of the whole story, analyzing the fight as it happened. This, I think, would have thrived on something like that.
They did that Fox for the third fight. To the Octagon. Didn't they used to do those 1 hour Road to the Octagon specials on Fox?
It was those that took a look at 3 fights. Your main fight would get 20 minutes of time. Your secondary would get 15, and the other would get 5.
Not like a typical countdown. I think there were some other ones that were on Fox before, and I think drew decent numbers.
This would have benefited.
A few of them drew decently. The GSP one drew rather well, but the other two were not cost effective.
Okay.
If I remember.
All right. Well, to me, you need to be experiment. You need to experiment. You need to do different things that they're just. I feel like they're not even trying.
They're not. That's the thing. And this one, what you could have produced very cheaply, because there is so much stock footage from various things of them describing what happened. You know, this guy, you know, he left the camp and did this, or, you know, I was sick of this. They were doing this to me in the camp. There's so many underlying stories to that have been brought out that people who follow it have a pretty good understanding.
Right.
This is a legitimate, heated rivalry. These guys have no respect for each other in terms of them as people. As fighters, it's a little bit different, but as people, they do not respect each other. And there's just a lot that you can work with that they have chosen not to.
The first fight was a great fight, too. I feel like you can do a lot with this.
I think he said it right. It's as good a 7-minute fight as you can have.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But the thing is, he also pointed out that, yeah, it's flawed because neither one of them is an exceptional personality to go speak, you know, to the media or do those things. If you've listened to them, say, on the Joe Rogan Experience, nothing that they say would be interesting really to anybody.
I enjoyed Garbrandt on the Rogan Experience. He's an interesting. I think he's interesting because he's kind of like trailer. He's like trailer trash that became like a UFC champion, basically.
But if you're not a fan, you really wouldn't have any interest in what he's saying, and that's not the goal. Is to get the people to buy this.
It's true. Like, I think again, Dillashaw as well. These guys both struggle to get outside the bubble. You know, it's hard for them to reach outside of the MMA sphere and really kind of connect with people. And again, it's not that either of them is uninteresting necessarily, because like Jeff said, Cody has a rags to riches story. I mean, his story is shockingly identical to Dominic Cruz's. If you've heard Cruz on the Joe Rogan Experience as well, talking about his past. But it's an issue of, can they really get across in a less than
my point is, I don't
bite.
say this about the UFC lightly. Now, after Strikeforce bought some of the Elite XC's assets and expanded and was basically the de facto number 2, they didn't flex their marketing muscle either, and to me that was a big reason they failed to really break through. They thought, like, we have the big names and we have some big matchups. All these fights are going to sell themselves. Lo and behold, they didn't. Okay? And Strikeforce did not invest in marketing efforts to really open up the promotion. That stuff is really important. Like, and I say some of that's grassroots. Some of it is grassroots, but some of it's just like getting billboards for your fight cards and your fight events. Strikeforce didn't do any of that, where UFC at the time did. And I don't see the UFC doing it right now, and I'm very concerned and I'm troubled by it.
All right, well, with that stuff out of the way, let's get into the actual fight. Again, these two, I have gone back and forth on this
Dillashaw
so many times.
wins.
This is one of those rare instances where after just a single 7-minute fight, both guys have proven they can win this fight. It's just a question of the details of execution.
Garbrandt is
on the
way
night.
too emotional. He is way too emotional.
He's also
He's gonna fight angry, and he's gonna do stupid crap again, and he's gonna get slept.
He might. I mean, it's weird because for as emotional as he is outside the cage, he's not really an emotional fighter. I said this about him when we reviewed this the first time, or their first fight. When Cody fights defense first, I don't know that anyone in the division can beat him. I mean, he shut down basically Dominic Cruz. That whole first round, I don't think Dillashaw landed a single good blow. I mean, he completely shut him down and very nearly finished him.
Didn't you score that fight for Cruz, though?
I've said before I was wrong about that. And every time I've rewatched it, it's either been for Garbrandt or I think there was one time I scored it a draw. But the point being, I mean, he just unequivocally had success against Cruz, but more so than anyone in the last, 5 years has had against him. He completely shut down TJ Dillashaw for a full 5 minutes. Watching him fight defense first, it's dazzling. I don't know how, again, I don't think anyone can beat him when he does that. In the second round, he made a bad read. And Dillashaw, rather than go through a bunch of stupid monkey stance or shoulder shrugs and the feints that he gets other people to bite on, because anytime he tried that against Cody, Cody actually had a read and countered him. When he stopped, this is somewhat ironic considering you want to feint, but when he stopped feinting as much, he made Cody kind of guess about where is this kick going. And Cody had a bad read on where the kick was going and the distance they were at, and he got clipped. Then he got too invested in trying to get back the knockdown. And once that happened, when he fights offense first, he gets hit and relies on his chin to get him through it. A lot of very subpar fighters were able to land on him during his run up to the title fight. I mean, Marcus Brimage, Henry Briones, Augusto Mendez, these are not world beaters. In fact, most of them aren't all that good. And they all were able to kind of land on him because he knew he could just walk through their punches and destroy them. And that's fine when you're fighting Marcus Brimage. It's terrible when you're fighting TJ Dillashaw. Because Dillashaw can crack. And that's what happened in the second. Again, he just got more into the offense than the defense. And got into an exchange of hooks that if he was more in his own, in the proper place, that's normally an exchange he wins. He's a very good hooker. But thinking the way he was, being a little bit rattled, he did it poorly. He got clipped again. Fight's done. So again, we know what both guys have to do to win this fight. They've both demonstrated that on the night they can win. There's not a lot of ambiguity here. This is not, well, I don't know what TJ has to do or what adjustments he has to make. No, it's pretty clear. I know what Cody has to do. It's just who's going to do it on the night. Which leads me to what do I think will happen? I've kind of gotten to this point when it comes to picking fights in this circumstance that I just want to watch the world burn. And in this case, that means... Actually, now that I think about it, that doesn't help me. Because if Cody wins, TJ bitches, we get an immediate rematch, and we put Marlon Moraes and some other top bantamweight contender on ice while they settle it again, stag me the division. If Dillashaw wins, you have killed the career of the most promising high-level bantamweight in the division for at least 18 months to 2 years. And both of those are pretty terrible realities to live with, and let's also be very clear, those are the realities we're looking at. It doesn't matter if Cody wins, it does not matter how he wins. TJ will lobby for an immediate rematch. And we'll probably get it because, let's face it, Cody got knocked out in their first fight and gets an immediate rematch.
Unless they give an immediate title shot to Dominic.
If Dominic ever fights again.
Again, there's a lot of wild cards there. And, again, kind of because I just want to watch the world burn when it comes to this. And I know that... you asked me, I think, a couple of weeks ago, Jeff, if the fact that I don't like either of these guys plays into this. And in fairness, I don't. As personalities, I can't stand either of them. But for some reason, I don't like TJ Dillashaw's face. And I don't know why. And this is not on him, it's just his face. None of us have any...
He used to be in Team Alpha Male.
Yeah,
and even though he's not there anymore...
Leaving would make Robert like his face, though.
No, bear in mind, when I say I don't like his face, this is not metaphorical. This is literally, I look at a picture of him, and I don't like the aesthetics. Consequently, because
he has a face you want to punch, I guess.
No, because he would kick my ass. I'm under no delusions about this.
I mean, you kind of confuse me. I guess.
And again, I don't know what it is. And look, the man has a wife and children, and my opinion of the aesthetic
makeup. There are all sorts of faces I'm like maybe not into.
I know that. I mean, and
Dillashaw doesn't have one of those.
And look,
so
and again,
it's hard for me to understand.
I'm not claiming it's a representation of the mathematical proportions that faces normally fall into to be aesthetically pleasing over the widest possible spectrum.
Okay, I'm looking at it right now, and if there's anything you can pick on, he has a large forehead with protruding supraorbital ridges that make him look kind of mutant-esque in like a sci-fi movie kind of way.
I think it's his
nose.
But
really splitting hairs
in all
there.
honesty.
You guys are body shamers.
Yeah, duh.
Body shamers.
And look, and no. It's shaming if I say, how dare he not fix this. All right? This is literally just me explaining my pick here because, again, if it's just technique-based, flip a coin. These two are that good. They've both got a way to win. They've both proven they can win. I have no technical basis at the moment for picking one guy over the other.
Does this make Jim Cornette a body shamer for telling Kevin Dunn he should get his Bucky Beaver teeth fixed?
I said, you know what I'm tired of, motherfucker? I'm tired of them goddamn fucking Bucky Beaver teeth, and I'm going to pull you over this goddamn table and beat the fuck out of you.
No, and look, again, TJ has a wife who loves him, I assume. He has a child. There are people who care about him. My opinion of...
He's a two-time UFC champion. He's one of the most...
I mean, this guy's got everything in the world going for him.
One of the most successful UFC bantamweights in history.
One of, yes.
Ridges, motherfucker.
And look, the fact that I don't like looking at him is of utterly no consequence, except as it pertains to I never get anything I like or want in this world. So I'm going to have to look at more pictures of him holding the belt when he wins. This is literally me picking based on the universe screwing with me whenever it has a reasonable opportunity to do so.
And you know what? I like Cody Garbrandt outside of his really short fuse and temper. And I'm not like... there's just something about people with that many tattoos where it's like...
Especially if they're placed on your neck.
Like...
The neck tats aren't a good look, that's true.
Like, I'm not saying, like, it's your body to do what you want with it. If you're into tattoos...
for you body shaming him for his tattoos.
No, I'm just saying, like, come on, man. Like, what...
Well, at this point, he can't get them removed. They're too saturated.
Do you really need that much? I mean, think about it. If you live to be in your 70s, do you want to be 70 years old and have that much ink on your body?
Yeah, there's a lot of people who have not thought that far ahead in their life.
I mean, it's okay if you aren't, but I mean, come on. Like, I mean, that's just why I've never wanted to get tattoos, It's like, plus if your body goes through changes, you gain weight, you lose weight, it can, the design will get...
If, for an MMA-related example of this, the tattoo of Johnny Cash that Alan Belcher has on his arm.
Yeah.
That if you didn't tell me it was Johnny Cash, I would never know it, because he got it before he actually developed. So as his skin stretched, the whole thing deformed horribly.
But whatever. It's their bodies.
It is, and again, if I'm just going to talk about the technique of this fight, I love it, and I couldn't possibly pick a winner because it's so.
I'm picking Dillashaw. Picking Dillashaw just because I feel like he's going to do dumb crap. He's going to leave the opening. And Dillashaw's going to head kick him to hell.
And he might. And then because the universe hates me, this leads to more pictures of Dillashaw that I wind up having to look at. Pat, help us out here. Are you going with Cody here? I kind of feel like you are, or you want to, but anything that I missed, any technical things that you think either guy needs to adjust for going into this fight?
To me, the biggest factor is going to rely on, does Cody realize that fighting defensively first is his best option against TJ? It's not even just his best option as a whole as a fighter. It's specifically very effective against TJ. We saw that happen to TJ when he fought Dominic Cruz. We saw that happen to a certain extent when TJ fought in the UFC as a bantamweight and got his first bantamweight loss against Rafael Assunção. Assunção didn't necessarily engage him immediately, kind of made him go in first, and when he was able to do that, he got the jump on TJ in certain things. And part of it is based on that time TJ was not that experienced. He really didn't have that veteran level of savvy that he does now. But Garbrandt, as you pointed out, has a very, very good defensive game. And when he utilizes that head movement, that positioning, he makes very good guys look very average. And he did it to Dominic Cruz, which really says a lot about when he's on. That's huge. And he was doing it through the first portion of the fight. He got lost in the action in that second round. And because TJ is a veteran at this point, he understood where he could capitalize on that, saw his opening and took it. Now, if Cody doesn't present that opening, we probably have a different result. I think TJ, the biggest thing for him to work on, and I think he's made some strides in that regard, is he's got to get more time in against guys who are defensively very adept. So in his sparring camps, and this is something Dwayne Ludwig, I don't necessarily trust him with, he's got to bring in really elusive, frustrating guys for TJ to go in there with. Because that's the only way TJ is going to fight these defensive-minded guys first better. The only really brilliant defensive person I've seen them bring into TJ's camp is Vasily Lomachenko. And I do think that's a really positive thing, but it's a different kind of defense that TJ is going to see in those instances. It's not the full picture of what he's going to be presented with, especially because Lomachenko doesn't utilize a lot of movement in his defense. His defense is about standing in front of you and utilizing better angles to make you miss by an inch and counterstrike you. Cody does a variation of that, but it's not the same. And a lot of Cody's defensive game is based on when he's in kicking range, he doesn't stay there. He's either immediately in or immediately outside. Whereas Lomachenko pretty much stands in front of you the entire time. So you have to gauge your distance all over again against Cody, whether you're inside or outside. Doing that, it really can do a number on your mind in a fight. And I've heard people say that TJ landed a fluky shot. That's not accurate. TJ picked a very good shot at a precise moment that he saw the opening for. There was no luck involved in that. He was presented with an opportunity and he took it. That's what fighting is all about. If Cody is able to mature based on that fight, which a really great fighter will do, he'll win this fight. If he doesn't, he will make a mistake again, and TJ will capitalize on it. Just to be contrarian, I'm going to say Cody doesn't make that mistake again, and we see a different fight, and we get treated to a third fight because of that. And a lot of times I'd be disappointed about having to see guys frozen out of the title picture, but these are two guys who I could probably watch fight 10 times consecutively and never be disappointed with.
Also fair. All right, so again, that's the main event. I'm really looking forward to that, even if I don't like the circumstances. I do love the actual fight. In the co-main event, we have another rematch. Flyweight king and supreme overlord of all people below the height of 5'5", Demetrious Johnson, is taking on Henry Cejudo again. Demetrious now has 11 consecutive title defenses. He's going for number 12 here. I don't expect this to look anything like the last time these two fought. And let me be clear about that, first of all. In their first fight, Mighty Mouse ran him over. I mean, Henry got a bit of a takedown. Demetrious got back up. There was a lot of clinching, but in every clinch scenario, Henry was looking for positional advantage, whereas Demetrious was content to have his back on the cage, but be the one landing elbows and knees and twisting and turning and angling and just overwhelming him with offense until he caught him a good shot to the body, a good one to the head, actually, that wobbled him, another good one to the body that dropped him, and that's all she wrote. Henry has learned from that. I mean, he looked very different even when he fought Joseph Benavidez in his fight after that. Then, stopped Wilson Hayes in 2 rounds, just dominated Sergio Pettis. And again, Henry has a few things that can trouble Demetrius depending on how the fight goes. One is just straight up his wrestling. Now, Demetrius is a very adept wrestler as well. He's good off of his back. He's a great scrambler. I mean, but if Henry can get him into the mindset of we're going to wrestle, he will win because he's a better wrestler. Henry packs more firepower. And now Demetrius is not easy to hit, but Henry hits hard, and if he's able to connect, that is very problematic. I still don't have a reason to pick against Demetrius Johnson. I need a compelling reason to do so. And I can see how Henry Cejudo wins this fight. Again, it's a lot of it is him surprising Demetrius with a different look, whatever that happens to be. But closing distance faster than he expects, landing a cleaner punch than he expects. It's got to be something like that because I don't think Henry can beat him consistently over a full 5 rounds. And I don't think Henry has more firepower, but it's got to be more of a surprise strike that lands because I think if we just go technique for technique, Demetrius is better. But that being said, again, you get hit once or twice, all the better technique in the world isn't going to help you if the guy hits hard. I still like Demetrius here. I think by submission this time instead of knockout, and it will take longer because Henry's better. But I think we might see DJ show off the mousetrap in this one. He's been hinting at it. So if he sees, and I don't know what it is, but apparently it's very legitimate. So I like Demetrius here, but if there's someone who's gonna really trouble Mighty Mouse, it is someone like Henry Cejudo. So you can't take this as a gimme or take it lightly based on their first fight, but all things considered, I still favor Mighty Mouse to catch him with something. So, Pat, I'll start with you for this one. How do you see this going? Have the improvements that Henry has made put him in a better position to win here, or was he just always going to be in a better position because he was woefully unprepared the first time?
Henry has gone from being Kurt Angle to Steve Blackman.
All right.
He is no longer the Olympic wrestler who's going to grind you and grapple you and suplex you. He is a lean, mean karate machine. In all seriousness, his last fight, particularly against Sergio Pettis, but even before that against Wilson Hayes, he looked like a different fighter. He was out there on his toes, darting in and out. He reminded me of almost like a Lyoto Machida superfan kind of deal, where he was really trying to channel that in his performance. And I like it. He needed to do something different. He needed to change up what he does. And he's added this dimension to his game now, and it's very different than what we saw, from the first time when he fought Demetrius. He wasn't prepared. He got beat shortly. No shame in that when you're fighting the man who is the best mixed martial artist in the world. But I think that kind of gave him that. We talked about the idea of the chip on the shoulder being a good thing. I think that gave Cejudo one, and I think he's made huge strides in his game. And this is going to be, I think it's going to be Mighty Mouse's toughest fight to date. And, just combine the fact that with Cejudo now implementing this technique, add to that Cejudo hits very hard. There's a lot to like. I'm still going Demetrius Johnson. I still think he's just all around a more diverse fighter with better tools. I think the biggest thing here for Cejudo is that Johnson still has one bad habit. he still tends to pull out of exchanges with his chin elevated. When you're fighting a guy who hits very hard, that will get you a loss column. That will get you in the loss column real quick. But I think Demetrius gets away with it, at least at the moment, because there is not a better judge of distance in all of MMA than him. There really is not somebody who has that spatial understanding the way he does. It's why he's so effective in the clinch. It's why, despite his dimensions on the outside, he's very hard to deal with. And if you let him get a hold of you, his grappling is exemplary. And that includes threatening Cejudo with things Cejudo's not necessarily used to, from a jiu-jitsu standpoint, from a catch wrestling standpoint, training with Matt Hume. I'm favoring Mighty Mouse. I'm favoring him to win inside the distance. But I certainly wouldn't rule out Cejudo maybe catching him on the end of something and hurting him. I just think Mighty Mouse's ability to adapt, adjust, and overcome is superior to anything we've seen in MMA.
I'd put it up. I think Holloway's a better adapter than Mighty Mouse is, but that's just me. Mostly because Holloway does it in real time. I think if you go between rounds, Mighty Mouse is better. He takes instruction better, but Holloway makes better reads. Anyway, that's nitpicking about the two best guys in the world right now. Jeff, how do you see this one going? Are you gonna buck the trend? Is this where the wheels come off for Mighty Mouse?
No, I think Cejudo has improved and gotten better. I still don't feel like he has anything that's going to give Demetrius problems, honestly. I just haven't seen it, and I don't feel confident betting on it. Demetrius wins everywhere and wins by decision.
All right. Ugh. You know what? I'm just going to read through the rest of this card because it's not good. And some of this is injury-related. Like, the third fight on this card was supposed to be Alexander Gustafsson and Volkan Oezdemir, which is a good fight. It's good for that division. But didn't happen. Oezdemir got injured. Gustafsson got injured. Nope. So, as for the rest of this card, we have Thiago Santos fighting Kevin Holland. This was supposed to be Thiago Santos and Derek Brunson, which would have been a... No, I'm sorry, excuse me. Was this always supposed to be this? God, that's sad. Yeah, apparently this was always supposed to be this. That is horribly sad. Alright, this is a gimme for Thiago Santos, who's coming off of that surprising loss to David Branch. Not that he lost, but the way he lost. Santos gets back on the horse here. Then we have Polyana Viana taking on J.J. Aldrich. I don't know why this is on the main card. This is a poorly constructed pay-per-view. I'll lean towards Aldrich, but I am not sold on that by any stretch of the imagination. Viana's fought in the UFC before. I think she lost her UFC debut was the thing. I don't care enough to look right now. Then we have a decent fight, actually, to kick off the main card in Cub Swanson and Renato Moicano.
Polyana beat Maya Stevenson, Joe Stevenson's wife, in her UFC debut in February.
Oh, yeah, they were on that terrible season of Tough together. Okay. Anyway, Swanson's on a 2-fight losing streak, losing to Brian Ortega and Frankie Edgar. I'm really looking forward to this fight, actually. Moicano's coming off of the win over Calvin Kattar.
And then lost to Ortega as well.
Yeah, that's his only loss. I like Cub here, but don't sleep on Moicano. Then on prelims, we have Pedro Munoz and Brett Johns, which is a relevant fight, all things considered. Munoz coming off of that loss to John Dodson. It was a split decision. I don't think I thought he lost, but he acquitted himself relatively well, apart from being unable to adjust. But adjusting's hard. I mean, that is one of the most difficult things to do in fighting, is to have drilled everything for 6 weeks and then go in and have to change all that muscle memory on the fly. It's hard. And Brett Johns just had his hype train derailed by Aljamain Sterling. I like Munoz here, but this is actually a pretty good fight. We have another bantamweight fight between Ricky Simon and Montel Jackson. This was.
Do you guys remember, like, in early, 92, 93, when WCW Saturday Night would have something they called Battle of the Underdogs? And it would essentially be two jobbers who were regularly seen on the program in a match against each other?
Vaguely. I want to say AJ Styles was on that once.
No. This is well before that. This
Okay.
is like the days of the Gambler versus Mark Starr.
Okay.
Yeah, this is like
Yellow
aside
Dog
from
showing up.
Yeah, aside from your top two fights and Swanson Moicano, this is kind of what the rest of this card is.
It does feel a little bit like that. Then there's a women's bantamweight fight between Betch Correia and Irene Aldana. God help us all, Betch Correia is still a thing. Correia's only win in her last 4 fights was a split decision that she probably should have lost. She lucked out with a draw in the Marion Renault fight. She should have lost that, and in her last fight, Holly just kicked her head off. Thankfully, because that fight was terrible. Aldana just got her first UFC win. I kind of thought she should have beat Chikagian in that fight, I seem to recall, but I don't remember the specifics. I'm pulling for Aldana here. I had some hopes for her coming into the UFC. Those have not yet been realized, and Betch Correia sucks. At featherweight, Matt Sales fights Shimon Moraes. Shimon lost his UFC debut, but what did he win? And I think he lost, but he's one of those guys that nobody pays attention to unless you're a really hardcore fan. But if you are, he's kind of legit. He just had a really rough debut fight. I might be confusing him with someone else, but off the top of my head, that's who I think he is. I like Moraes here. Then on Fight Pass, we have Jose Torres and Alex Perez. I like Torres here. I'm kind of becoming a believer in Shorty. At bantamweight, Ricardo Ramos takes on Kyung Ho Kang. It was nice to see Kyung Ho Kang back in the cage. He served out his military time already. He submitted Guido Canetti. I like Kong here. Women's strawweight, we have Danielle Taylor and Zhang Weilei. Taylor amuses me as a fighter. I mean, she's not all that good, but she's kind of funny to watch. And then kicking everything off, Marlon Vera fights Wuliji Borin. Vera's on a 2-fight losing streak. That's kind of rough. I'll go with Vera, but I wouldn't be shocked if Burin takes this. So, Jeff, I'll start with you. What else on this card strikes your fancy? What are you looking forward to? Give me a reason to hope.
I think Swanson Moicano is a good fight. Remember, Thiago Santos. He is coming off a loss to David Branch, but Thiago Santos, I think, is a very tough, underrated middleweight. I don't know much about his opponent, but I mean, I'm a Thiago Santos fan, so I'm looking forward to his fight. Who's his opponent? His opponent is from the Contender Series, so that's why he's on this card. Not sure he should be on the main card, but oh well.
Again, this is a poorly put together pay-per-view.
The prelims, wow.
Yeah.
Prelims are basically a wasteland at this point.
Yep.
Let me see. Brett Johns is the guy that lost to Aljamain Sterling. It's pretty. Yes, it's pretty grim on the prelims. But
wasteland.
But there are a couple decent. I mean, Swanson versus Moicano is a good fight. That's a good fight.
All right, Pat. I know your general opinion, but find something in there that you're kind of looking forward to, even for comedy value.
Let's see. Oof. There seems to be a fair percentage of Korean martial artists on this show.
Korean or Chinese, yeah.
So maybe perhaps they will attract something of a crowd in Los Angeles where there is a sizable East Asian population. I once in Los Angeles on a visit had some amazing North Korean barbecue from a truck. So I feel like there's a chance that that Korean was good. One of these two Koreans could potentially be good.
All right. Oh, wait, Ricky Simon's the guy who choked out Merab Dvalishvili. That was such a weird end to that fight. Anyway.
Yeah, I really like that movie, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, because of the flying and the magic.
Alrighty.
Ramos versus Kang looks like it's a decent matchup, too.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not...
It's
Both guys are decent.
Again,
guys on a winning streak.
We're desperately hoping. But, yeah, I mean, Ramos hit that really nice spinning back
I mean,
elbow
if
that
you had
knocked
that
Zahabi
with some
stupid.
better names on there, but man, dang.
It's rough on paper. It
is
really,
very rough
really
on
is.
paper.
All right. Anyway, despite it being rough, I will be covering that event this coming Saturday from start to finish in the MMA Zone
Thank
411
you.
Mania.
That's why you're the man, Robert.
Seriously, better you than
now,
me.
dog.
So stop by, say hello. I appreciate it. All right, let's jump into some of the news items then. Again, I think the big one was they finalized Darren Till versus Tyron Woodley for the welterweight title as the main event for UFC 228. I think I mentioned
And that's supposed to headline in Dallas.
The good news is
forgot
after next week we're going to get a 3-week break.
Really?
Until Gagey versus
I
believe so, until Gagey versus Vic.
Yeah, that's the next upcoming card, and that's not taking place till the 25th, right?
That is true.
Right, so 3 weeks. So you'll get at least 3 weeks.
And then, yeah, there's a few other breaks. Yeah.
That's not a great fight card, but that's a decent main event at least.
Oh, Gagey and Vic will be fun. I mean, Justin Gagey is. If you can't have fun watching that guy fight, your MMA is just not for you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God, that is a weak card.
Yeah,
That's
isn't that when
that's a great main
Shevchenko takes
event.
his rightful place as the women's champion?
What was that?
Isn't that when Valentina Shevchenko gets her rightful belt as the strawweight champion?
For 228, yes. Yeah, again, the main event is Woodley and Till, which I don't know.
At least that fight is finally booked.
I don't know if I
Yeah,
mentioned
it's
this
not Nico
on air.
Montano versus Sajara Eubanks.
And I love Valentina, so I hope she finally wins the UFC gold.
Barring a freak injury, I think this is her fight to lose. But as far as Woodley and Till goes, I think I mentioned this to you guys off air. I do need to say it on air. I heard posited that Darren Till wins a terrible fight via decision in just a horrible fight. But for some reason, Tyron Woodley gets an immediate rematch. Darren Till then misses weight for that fight, vacates the belt to move up, and then at some point in early 2020, Woodley and Covington fight for the vacant middleweight belt. And this is now what I want out of the sport. Just because that's so much... That would just be what would amuse me the most.
I just don't understand this. Till missed weight his last fight out.
He did. Could easily miss weight
Like,
here.
why do we even have weight limits anymore? It's just like, I mean,
Formality.
come on. If we're not even going to care about weight limits and fighters making weight at this point, we shouldn't even have weight classes. We should go back to old school no holds barred days. Just open weight tournaments.
Hey, there's a handful of lightweights that Demetrius could beat up.
Probably.
I mean, Alan Zuniga is on the
There are,
UFC
you know
roster.
what? There are probably some fighters Joanna could probably beat up too.
Yeah, again, I have to bring up Alan Zuniga because his fight, he was so terrible in that fight. But, yeah, so again, I mean, this came about because the UFC wanted to have an interim fight between Till and Dos Anjos, which was stupid. Or not Till and Dos Anjos, excuse me, Covington and Dos Anjos.
Why would any fighter accept an interim title fight at this point then? There'd be no reason to do that because of this precedent.
It's stupid. It is profoundly stupid. And then Colby needed some kind of nasal surgery which led to him not being available for this card. So now
what? So what? I mean, he's the interim champion. You made him the interim champion with the expectation that he's basically the number one contender, or he defends the title until Woodley's ready to defend it. I mean, when have they ever stripped an interim title before? They didn't do that with Robert Whittaker.
They did it to Tony. The last time they did it to Tony Ferguson.
Well, yeah, because Tony Ferguson got injured while he was interim champion.
Yeah, and Colby Covington's now injured while interim champion.
And they finally stripped and they wouldn't strip McGregor, and they stripped McGregor at that time.
I believe technically Colby will maintain his interim title until these two start to fight.
Who gives a damn,
honestly?
honestly?
He was stripped.
I mean, it's one of those things where as soon as the cage door shuts for Woodley and Till, he's going to be stripped. But until then...
Stupid. Strip Tyron Woodley. Strip Colby Covington. Strip every damn champion. And just declare one ultimate champion after an open weight tournament.
Whoever beats Brock Lesnar next.
Pretty much.
And then let Braun Strowman cash in.
This is gender. We don't even. It can be open weight, open gender. How about it, Robert?
Yeah, sure. Let's have the visual of a mediocre male athlete beating the crap out of your second best female fighter.
But I mean, that's what the UFC has done here, basically.
I mean, this situation finally might get people to wake up to how meaningless interim titles are. And we said it was stupid that they made Colby versus RDA as an interim title fight, because it would lead to this. Because Woodley was still ready to come back, very, very closely related to that fight. And whoever won that fight was not going to be on
Don't
a
even make
reasonable
interim
timetable.
titles. Start if they're not ready to go and you're not happy. Just start stripping titles. Make it a rule. Make it a rule where you have to have a fight set up at least by a year. And if it's not done, it's sorry. We got to move on with the division. We're taking your title away.
Yep.
Champions have to fight and defend their belts, right?
You hear that, Brock Lesnar?
Champions have to fight, and we have to keep the divisions moving. It's that freaking simple. Conor McGregor should have been stripped of his title a long time ago. He's a disgrace and an embarrassment to the sport. But UFC, Dana White, and Ari Emanuel were too afraid to anger Conor McGregor.
Because they can't make stars.
Yep.
Well, they can't do it anymore.
Anyway, on the plus side, I imagine that fight only goes one of two ways.
Chael Sonnen agrees with me.
That does not increase your.
That's not
that doesn't
your
help
cause.
your position.
I think it does. He's fought more than I have.
Yeah, but
he's gonna fight. He's gonna fight and defeat Fedor. So you should have a little more respect for the baddest on the planet.
I respect no one fighting in Bellator. I mean, at this point, Bellator is the wrestling equivalent of TNA. I don't have to care about anything anyone related to that promotion does. They're a joke.
That's fair.
Anyway, as far as that fight goes, it either ends quickly with Woodley not being able to defend Till's offense, or Till walks onto a counter, or it's another entry into the growing legacy of Tyron Woodley having the worst title fights in UFC history. I mean, if this is another really bad one, he will have surpassed Tim Sylvia. Because Sylvia at least had one or two that went fast. All right, so anyway, apart from that, any other major news we wanted to touch on here, Jeff?
Conor's plea.
Yeah,
true.
There you go.
Yeah, Conor McGregor reached a plea deal for... He has to go to anger management counseling, which he will send his infant son to do in his place.
Yeah, they won't know the difference.
Service,
5 days of community service, monetary restitution.
Yep.
It's what we all thought he was going to get, and it's still nothing. It's nothing.
But it doesn't count whatever civil lawsuits he could be facing from the fighters he affected.
That is true.
Who could be?
But the whole thing there is the word going around is that there won't be any of those happening because the UFC is going to basically kind of take it upon themselves to squash any of that before it could potentially affect negotiations between them and Conor.
Are they going to squash it financially or just be like, hey, don't do this? Are they going to pressure them internally?
They're going to cough up some money. And while all the terms of the plea deal were not disclosed, allegedly part of the deal in place is that the fighters who were medically ineligible to compete at the card are going to receive payment from Conor because of that.
Dana White told reporters last week, Conor and I are good. Conor has faced a lot of repercussions. Conor has lost a lot of money and a lot of time, and yeah, Conor and I are good. We're good.
It's a bunch of boilerplate that he's now spewing because he wants to promote Conor.
Despite the fact that he called this the most disgusting act he'd ever seen in the sport.
Well, in the UFC, certainly, there's a lot worse that's happened in other promotions.
Yeah, but part of the plea deal is apparently that he did make some kind of financial restitution to the fighters who could not compete based on what he did. And then the word going around is that the UFC kind of stepped into and sweetened that pot for those fighters to prevent any kind of civil lawsuits happening.
If he would have just said Conor is the biggest star we have under contract, we hope to work things out with him, I would have accepted that. But he's the one who used the rhetoric, so that's kind of what angers me.
It's what he always does. I mean, it's
Dana.
Dana.
It's what he's always been. He's always been a dishonest leech who has to perpetuate some kind of story and avoid actually saying what happened because he knows no other way.
At least
So
I feel like he had
he's a
conviction.
promoter.
I feel like he had conviction before.
Nah, we just didn't know any better.
I did.
Again, okay. Old school, longtime boxing fans knew better. Those of us who hadn't dealt with the ins and outs of...
wrestling fans do.
Well, I mean, look,
Okay,
I get that
he's
he has no ownership stake anymore, and
It's minor. I think
he has people he has to answer to. But
look at Bruce Pritchard, right?
Right.
You're a cog in that machine for so long that you really just can't break out of the habit of just towing that company line no matter how dishonest you're being, even without profiting from it.
Jim Ross does that too. I mean,
he's another one. I just think it's Pritchard's probably the most prominent one in terms of how many listeners he has.
But they put Pritchard's show on WWE Network now, so.
Which is eventually the goal. That was what Pritchard was doing the whole time. He's doing that in the hopes he gets a job, much like Dana's doing it in the hopes that they'll, find some other menial task for him to make more money off of, and so that he's never cut off from the teeth because Dana has nothing to offer outside of this. And really, it's questionable what he still has to offer. There was a point to having him around when they needed somebody to be behind the trumpet or the megaphone yelling, to get people to pay attention to the UFC. He served the purpose.
I mean, he was loud. He was the right personality, and
I almost hate to agree
work
with Brendan Schaub, but man, I kind of agree with Brendan Schaub here.
I don't agree that Schaub could do what Dana does. I think
no, not him, but I think I agree with Schaub on that issue regarding Dana White, that he's gotten the UFC as far as he can, and it's kind of maybe time for him to phase out.
Yeah, but the difference is you don't have a personal grudge to put against Dana in that same way that Schaub does. So it's a little more credible coming from me or you than him.
Maybe not personal, but I have some things going on with the UFC.
We do, but not to the level of Brendan Schaub does. So it's a little more credible when people like me or you say that and bring up the argument than it is Brendan Schaub.
All right, fair enough. I just,
I mean, again, the UFC wouldn't be where
And
it
you know
is
what?
without him, but
I will say to his credit, I don't know if whoever replaced him would do a better job and fix these problems I have. So there's that. You know, sometimes it is the devil you do know.
yeah.
I think there is some weight to that. But I just think there's just like this Till Woodley thing. Just
Look, it's the best title fight you can make, assuming that Woodley wants to be on this card.
What about Kamaru Usman?
Usman didn't he have a fight?
But Usman can make weight.
Yeah, but I mean, again, the point being, if Usman's already signed for some other fight, there's logistics in place for that can be troubling. And again, I'm worried about Till making weight, but
welterweight title fight. Wait until Covington's ready to go. It's not rocket science.
Tyron Woodley has bills, man. He might need to fight. He might need the money.
Not based on what Woodley says. He's got all sorts of outside the cage stuff going for him.
Yeah, that's what he says.
There's also reality. I'm honestly really curious. If you give like another, let's say 20 years down the road, I'm going to be really curious to see the quote-unquote top fighters from this generation, the Tyron Woodleys, those guys. I would really love to see 20 years down the road how they're doing financially.
A lot of them will not be doing well.
Well,
a lot of them aren't doing exactly great right now.
Well, we understand, that in the days of NHB and those guys in that generation now that the money was never there in the first place. But all we've been hearing is how the money's there, the money's better, blah blah blah. And there are confirmed payouts to guys per fight of amounts like $500,000 at your highest levels. But a guy like Woodley who does make six figures per fight, I'm really going to be curious to see what his financial state is 20 years from now.
Forrest seems to be doing okay, from what I've seen.
Who is that?
Forrest Griffin, for example.
Well, I think he's going to be more the exception to the rule.
Maybe.
He's a guy
right now we're looking at Chuck and Tito both coming out of retirement. I imagine there's a financial incentive to them doing that. Rashad's going to be an interesting case because Rashad made a fair amount of money.
But I remember Forrest had that thing where he didn't even get rid of his years later he still had the car he won from the Ultimate Fighter.
Sure,
basically.
He
kept that.
Cars depreciate, but no reason to get rid of it.
Like Griffin, basically Forrest was not wildly overspending and doing stupid. He lived a normal life.
He also had a real job too.
Right.
And then even then when he got his token position in the office.
And he also had book deals. He had all that as well.
Yeah, and again, when he got his token office position,
he took
rather
it seriously.
Than just collect the check, he was showing up for work every day.
Right.
There's a reason he stuck around when they fired everybody else that got a cushy office job just for no reason.
And Matt Serra seems to be doing okay too for that, but he's best friends with Dana anyway.
Well, he's best friends with Dana. He's also actually had a financially profitable business outside the UFC for close to 20 years now with his jiu-jitsu studio.
Yeah.
And now he's trained a whole new generation of top fighters as well.
Well, and that's the thing. He's been able to get a new generation of fighters invested in the UFC who still pay him, guys like Chris Weidman. And once he became friendly with Jim Norton and they launched their show, he's got that deal through the UFC thanks to his friendship with Dana.
But that is going to be really interesting in a few years now that the sport is kind of established to see what happens to the guys who made
Woodley.
decent money.
I don't think a guy like Woodley is going to do too badly because, from what I know about Woodley personally, I don't think unless he's just been really stupid with his money. I know he probably has an ex-wife and he's got 4 kids, but I think a guy like him is doing okay. The guy I worry about is John Jones. That's the guy I'm
more worried about Connor than I am about John, in all honesty.
And Connor. Connor, because
these guys are not spending wisely.
Well, not just that with Connor. Connor, to me, is surrounded by yes men who are enabling his bad behavior and can't be trusted. And I'm not worried. Not worried about Connor, but I'm I'm thinking if
you're thinking he's going to suffer Tysonism, where he has
Yeah.
$250,000 a year best friends.
Yeah, and I feel the same with John Jones.
I think John, like the problem with John too is his vices. Everybody's got vices. His are the most expensive things you can think of: fast cars, cocaine. Like that's the kind of stuff that'll go real quick through your bank account.
I'll tell you something. Something that stuck out to me in John Jones' appearance on the JRE. He said he had like enough money to have 1 million kids. Now,
now we're worried he's going to try to prove that point.
His words, not mine.
Yeah.
So to me, that just kind of tells me he's not really worried. To me, that just tells me he hasn't really changed, and he's not really worried about money and where it all goes. And
I get that there's, and listen, we've all held jobs in our lifetimes where we've moved from that job to something else, and you've seen a big upswing in pay, and there's that element of treat yourself when you get that, because you were living on this past income that maybe say it was like 75% of the income you're making now, so you've got that bonus in your pocket that you're looking at, basically, that you treat yourself to a new leather jacket or like a really
or a nice meal or something.
Restaurant. Yeah.
Within reason.
And that's the mentality. But, I guess there's that mentality of, well, I just got a check for $150,000 after I was working part-time as an instructor at this gym making $250 a week. I'm going to go out and buy a Maserati now, or something along those lines. And probably the most sane thing I've ever heard somebody in a crazy world of entertainment say is Kevin Nash talking about how when he became WWE champion in 1995, the first thing he did was he was still living in the same house he had in Arizona, and he outright bought one at a fixed mortgage rate over a 20-year period and kept the same 1992 Ford Bronco he had. He just rebuilt the transmission in it so that it would still last without having to buy something new and fancy.
No, I mean, that's smart. I would probably buy a Tesla, though.
Mick Foley tells the stories frequently about how even when he was at or near the top of the card, for a while he was still staying in these terrible hotels because they were cheaper.
He was staying in people's houses and not bringing changes of clothes and taking the popcorn from the concession stands to eat that they would throw out at night.
I mean, it's not the worst strategy if you're trying to make that money count and save it up.
That's how he's able to go to Knoebels whenever he wants.
I think it's good if you're trying to invest in your future and be uncomfortable now so you can be comfortable in the future. But
wasn't there a point in time where supposedly the UFC had hired financial support teams for the fighters themselves?
I think they still do that. I don't know.
That or I think what they wound up doing was that Fighter Summit thing they do. They just added they did what the NFL did, which is kind of a financial literacy guy comes in and talks to them for 20 minutes and no one pays attention and then they still wind up broke.
Right, yeah. So there's that element to it, which is basically to exonerate them in the future if anybody does in fact go broke.
Yeah, I mean,
So
the NFL did that as an optics thing after it came out that, hey, all these guys who killed themselves on the field were broke in 3 years and working in car washes.
Right.
Yeah, so, I mean, that was where the NFL and the Players Association stepped in and were like, okay, we'll reach an agreement and do this going forward.
Oh, I think Carlos Condit is probably doing okay unless his, side businesses fall into the ground. But I know
honestly, the best side business I've ever seen any fighter invest in ever is Danny Garcia, who is a boxer. Danny Garcia invested in a barbershop in a heavily populated Hispanic neighborhood in his hometown of Philadelphia, hired 3 barbers from the neighborhood who people would go to independently and have these guys cut their houses at their hair and stuff. Basically, he just gave them a storefront operation and had an immediate customer base and is likely to have that customer base go on and on and on. Because if you come from a neighborhood anywhere similar to that, you understand that barbershops are basically hit up by the same customers every 2 weeks or if they have an occasion or whatever. So it's a really profitable business for really, I don't want to say not skillful, because being a barber is a skillful job, but it's not intensive and long to do a job for somebody and make a lot of money really quickly.
Yeah.
Everyone needs their haircut every few weeks, you know.
Hey, it can be really hard to maintain a bald head, even for those who shave it.
Yep.
All right. Are there any other major news items you wanted to go over?
Did we get Lesnar is back in the USADA testing pool and can fight in January?
We talked about that a little bit last week. It's, I mean, I will not care about anything related to that fight until they shut the door on those two.
Yeah, Talis Latis is fighting Hector Lombard. I didn't even know Hector Lombard was still in the UFC.
I didn't think Latis was in the UFC either. But this should surprise no one, because coming up at...
Why is this not on Jungle Fights?
I think. I mean, look, the Gagey Vic card in a few weeks has Jake Ellenberger on it.
This essentially is a Jungle Fight card. Looking at it,
this is from
outside
Dominic
of that main
Cruz.
event. Yeah,
this is from Dominic Cruz. He says he's clear to fight and he wants to fight before the end of the year.
Well, he was supposed to have fought Jimmy, and then Jimmy lost.
I would like,
honestly, I'd like to see. I still like that fight.
I still like it. I like Cruz and Austin Sao. It's two top guys that haven't fought each other yet. I just hope everyone. I don't care who Dominic Cruz fights. I love watching the man fight. I hope everyone stays healthy and we get him into the cage.
I wouldn't mind Cruz and Marlon either.
I don't want him to fight Marlon. I want Marlon in the title picture at this point. And I don't think Marlon beats Cruz. And I just rather not kill off another top contender. But good on Dom being healthy again in theory.
Gustafsson was supposed to be on UFC 227, but he fell off due to a minor injury, whatever that is.
Yeah, and then we had the whole we while you were out, Jeff, we did talk about the whole DC tweet ridiculousness.
I mean, maybe the injury is not getting an interim titleitis.
It could be anything. Who knows?
I mean, there have been some ridiculous reactions to a lot of things. The DC tweet was one. The Mark Hunt lawsuit response to Brock in the USADA pool is another.
I didn't even hear about that. That was totally off.
Yeah, Mark Hunt is amending his lawsuit now that Lesnar's back with the UFC.
Oh, I did hear about. I heard his lawyer might amend it. I don't know if that actually happened.
They're already taking steps to do it based on that they know that this person has a history of this and they're not recognizing it, and that there's prior felonious assault based on the use of performance-enhancing drugs, and a whole slew of.
Well.
We went over the accusations last week in detail when we had the actual case open at the time.
Talking about a guy who you're worried about where his money is going to be in however long, Mark Hunt definitely springs to mind, considering
lawsuits ain't cheap.
Exactly. All he's doing is he's making lawyers rich. So I mean, good on you, Mark, for keeping the legal system going. Good job, Mark Hunt.
Literally every walk-off KO is paying for that right now.
Yeah.
All those knockout of the night bonuses.
He must love lawyers and hate money.
I imagine it's more he's sick of the UFC and wants to stick it to them and doesn't care what it costs.
I mean, if you're, considering he has small kids and a family, I mean, if it means being right that much.
If the UFC winds up paying him shut up money,
they're not going to do that.
At the moment they're not, but they might.
Hunt versus Fedor, Bellator 247 or whatever the hell it is.
Ugh. Just stop.
Hunt versus Chael Sonnen.
That was my next one.
There you go.
That would be hilarious just to watch Chael Sonnen bounce off of him like... I need an example. And the only one I have is like Carrie Elwes bouncing off Andre the Giant in The Princess Bride.
Still a classic.
Mark Hunt with his hands down, just in his accent. Just want you to feel you're doing well, mate. Hey, for people to die embarrassed. And then knocking his head off. All right. On that note, let's go ahead and wrap this up if there's nothing else we really wanted to touch on. So, Jeff, what do you got to plug? It's been a couple of weeks. You've got stuff from
I
SDCC.
just put up an event I did at Comic-Con for Alita Battle Angel. That's in. I'm working on getting my interview in with Sean Schemmel, the voice of Goku, and Eric Bauza, the voice of Splinter from Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and many other things. Will be up soon. And also a Shadow of the Tomb Raider session I did. And my my junket session with Iron Fist season 2 of Netflix, which I think, look, Iron Fist season 1 was not the best, but I feel like season 2 will at least be an improvement. Where can they go from here but up? That's what I have to say. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Jeff. I actually liked Iron Fist season 1.
Yeah, I know, but I feel like they're making dramatic improvements this season. Maybe, you know.
Well, after Jessica Jones season 2 and Luke Cage season 2, somebody's
I would
step
still
up.
put you know what? I would put Iron Fist season 1 above Jessica Jones season 2, which was that.
I would put the first 4 episodes of My Mother the Car above anything involving Jessica Jones. But...
to be fair, I'm not entirely sure whether The Defenders or season 2 of Jessica Jones is worse. Mark asked me that when I said I thought it was the worst. He said, including The Defenders, and I had to think about it, because I'm not sure.
Thanks, guys. Have a good week.
I'll see you next week, Jeff.
Bye.
Pat, how about you? Anything you want to plug?
Yeah, so this week, actually on Thursday night of this week, I will be recording an episode of Source Material along with Jesse Starcher and Ronnie Adams. We'll be discussing one of my favorite comic book storylines, Thor the Reigning. Basically, to give you a small preview, this is the story where Thor decides to just show his might and basically conquers the Earth and eventually becomes the All-Father. And a lot of fun stuff ensues along the way, including how we get out of that scenario too. It's written by Dan Jurgens, who is one of my favorite comic writers, period. I think he has had just some great runs on Thor and Superman, who are two of the more difficult characters to really write well, but when they're done well, it's excellent, and I think Dan Jurgens was great. So this storyline itself is really one of my favorites. There are tons of appearances from everybody across the MCU, the MU. You'll see the Hulk, you'll see Captain America, you'll see Iron Man, you'll see Wolverine, you'll see Doctor Strange. You'll see just a plethora of characters get involved in this. Some cool little niche things in there, including a version of Iron Man's armor that most people probably aren't familiar with. And really just it was a multi-issue arc that went on for the better part of a year in the Thor book and really set a good standard for storytelling. It involves a lot of the mythology that hadn't been touched on previously. I really love it. Jesse and I are going to talk in detail about it on Thursday, so give it a listen if you can.
All right. As for myself, this Tuesday, Mark Radulich and I will review Mission Impossible Fallout, where I will bash Tom Cruise and heap praise on Henry Cavill, and lament the fact that he has not been given this franchise on a platter, because at this point he's just better. Yep. So tune in for that, and his shirt magically growing a pocket.
The scary thing that was brought up the other day, and I don't know if you saw this too, about Tom Cruise's age, Robert.
All right.
Did you have?
No, I don't think I've heard this.
It was some crazy statistic of how. This is it. Tom Cruise in this Mission Impossible movie is 5 years older than Wilford Brimley was when he filmed Cocoon.
Oh, that's hilarious.
How insane is that?
Oh, okay. That'll tell you what lathering your hair in shoe polish will do for your career.
Tom Cruise is 56 years old, okay? Wilford Brimley is 83. When Wilford Brimley filmed Cocoon, he was 51.
Our understanding of age expectancy over that period of time seems to have changed a lot.
Like, literally, the whole premise of Cocoon is people in an old age home who get visited by aliens to make them young again and what have you. And look at them. Look at the pictures of Wilford Brimley and Cocoon. Now, credit to Wilford Brimley. Wilford Brimley hasn't aged since the making of Cocoon.
He hit that peak, and that was it.
Yeah, he got to that point where you just don't look older anymore. And that's great. But he was older in that movie than Tom Cruise is now, making Mission Impossible.
That is nuts. That is absolutely nuts. So, anyway, we'll be reviewing that, and then, again, Saturday we'll have coverage of UFC 227, and next Sunday we will review UFC 227, but that will be it for a bit, as we will be waiting for Vic versus Gaethje, which is the 25th, so, bring up my calendar. We'll be back on the 5th for 227, then we will be off the 12th and back on the 19th. Yeah, that's what that'll look like. Unless something else crazy happens. Oh,
not out of the question.
Wanted to give credit to Kyoji Horiguchi for being the second best flyweight in the world and beating up some dude in Ryzen last night. Also, no, seriously. Credit to Ryzen's production team. They made this really, really great video about Horiguchi after he won their Grand Prix, presenting that belt to his first karate master, who was like a month away from dying. And they made it part of their like hype video for his fight last night. It's a really, really exceptionally well done bit of fight hype that you should look up if you haven't seen it yet. And mostly I just like Horiguchi and think the way he was treated by the UFC was just endemic of how badly they treat that whole division. So, anyway, that's the basic plan for everything going forward. Until then, for Pat and Jeff, I'm Robert. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for sharing us with your friends. We much appreciate it. Stay safe out there, and please continue to be well, be safe, and behave.